Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one warned you about. I'm Nikki Jupp, the founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-ups to build the right teams, enabling them to scale with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, CEOs, and scale-up leaders share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filler, just honest conversations to help you scale smarter. So let's get into it.
What I learned with my business was when it was just the six of us, I could be hands-on.
Yeah.
And I could supervise and manage. When we put the seventh person on, my team became an interruption of my day because I can't concentrate. And I'm going, why can't they just do their job?
Yeah.
When I got to 12, for me, leadership really starts to make its presence felt around about the sixth or seventh person you put on. When you get to 12, you better be thinking about, if I've got more than 12 people on the team, 12 people, I really better be thinking.
Today I'm joined by Andrew Priestley. He's a business coach, psychologist and author. He spent over 25 years helping leaders navigate high-pressure environments, from mining sites through to boardrooms. Andrew's career spans coaching founders, CEOs and family businesses through the make or break stages of growth, leadership transitions and operational chaos. He's known for getting leaders out of the weeds and into strategic thinking, with a heavy dose of honesty and practical tools. In this conversation, we talk about what really drives great leadership, how to transition from founder to CEO, and why sometimes the biggest shift is internal. So let's dive in. I want to make a great big welcome, Andrew, and thank you for joining me today. Really looking forward to this dialogue.
Yeah, me too. And thanks for having me on as one of your guests. I appreciate that.
Absolute pleasure. Without further ado, let's get going. So, Andrew, you've worked with so many different kinds of leaders over the years.
Yep.
Can you take us back to a business that early on in your coaching journey that has really stuck with you? What was happening in that business and what role did you play?
Yeah, it's funny, for a bit of context for those people who don't know me, I started out as a school teacher, started life as a school teacher, and I taught in a remote country school in Australia. And I had 11 students, just me, in a one teacher school, 11 students. And I taught for 10 years. And on the sidelines, I was publishing. I was surfing and playing in a band, and I started up a newspaper that was publishing a surfing newspaper. And I was also running an entertainment gig guide, believe it or not, for the band as well. Yeah. And I took long service leave, and I actually started a newspaper that went into competition with Rupert Murdoch, believe it or not, in Australia.
I think that's setting the scene for this conversation.
And just so you know, Rupert won, okay? I didn't win that battle. Rupert won that battle, and truly. I had about 35 staff. He had about 165. So we were punching well above our weight, right, in that one. And so I started this business on an idea, and that's all it was. And I had a great idea for a business, but I didn't have a good business for the idea. And I was making lots and lots of money. And I thought, where the hell is it? No idea. But I was working 12 to 14-hour days, burning out. I was eating too much. I was drinking too much. I don't know if I was doing drugs or not, but I'm sure that was probably part of the equation. But I wasn't a nice person to live with either. Right. I wasn't seeing my kids. And I remember I came to a crossroads moment thinking my health started to suffer. I had adrenal fatigue. It was just so flat out. And I made the decision, I can't keep going with this. So I shut the business down.
Yeah.
And I hit that crossroads of money meets family values.
Yeah.
And so I shut the business down. I walked away with a debt. I remember that day because all the computers went, all the office went, but I still had the debt.
Yeah.
And in the next 4 years, I started an agency. I'd left teaching. I thought, what was the skill I used in the newspaper? And it was copywriting. I really good at it because I thought it was about surfing and music. No, it was all about advertising and business. And started a family-friendly ad agency and built that up and won awards. And ironically, I would start late and finish early.
Yes.
And I made more money and I made more profit. But at that stage, I'd learned to track my numbers and things like that.
Yes.
Okay, there's a point to the answer here. At that point, people started coming to me and saying, how did you do this? How did you win the awards? Blah, blah, blah. And people say, oh, can I just have a coffee with you? And I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And a mate of mine said, I think you'd make a good business coach. And I said, what's a business coach? Because at that stage I was very young. I think at the time there were 90 business coaches on the planet.
Oh, my goodness me.
And so I started training as a business coach. And then I wanted to pursue a passion of mine, which is I'd always been in really intrigued with psychology. So I went back and as an adult learner, I went back and I did an industrial organizational psychology degree.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say, Nikki, I loved it from the very first lecture to the very last lecture 5 years later. When I graduated, I started working, and here's the answer to your question, the memorable business. I started working with the hazard sectors. I graduated straight out of that. I had the coaching business running sidelong with my training.
Yeah.
And I started working, I was contacted by the Brisbane City Council in Australia, in a state called Queensland. And they said, we've got some CEOs of different departments, can you come and coach them? And then it went from there to hazard sectors, so life and limb. So it went down into mining, it went to medical, it went to government, all that sort of thing. And I was working with leaders under extreme pressure. So take, for example, the mining industry or the aviation. In mining particularly, if on a good day when something bad happens, someone gets injured, right?
Yeah.
But on a bad day, someone dies. Same thing with the medical. I was working with A&E units and geriatric care and things like that. And I thought I really understood leadership. I've been taught about leadership, that leadership is traits and qualities, and you've got to have these things that you can identify. So I go out on this mining site, and I kid you not, it's 35 guys, a big mining site, but 35 of the production leads were there. And these are big blokes. These are like 6'4", really solid, front teeth missing, hairy faced and stuff. And I've got them in a classroom setting with the PowerPoint and the binders, the ring binders. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you've lost the audience about 10 minutes in.
Yes. Oh, yeah, been there.
Yeah. And you go, oh, no, God, these guys, I've got another 8 hours of this or 6 hours of this. And there was no engagement.
Yeah.
Right. And it was all this stuff of what leaders are supposed to be. So 9:30 in the morning, I called time. I said, guys, go and take a smoke break. Go and have a smoke. When you could have a smoke break.
Yeah.
I said, go and have a break. And I said, and come back here at 10. And I played it as if this was the boring one that we do first, just to get you annoyed, and then we give you the real thing.
Yes.
That's how I spun it. But I actually didn't do that. When they came back, I got rid of the PowerPoint, I got rid of the data projector, I got rid of the binders, I got rid of everything. And I asked them one question that was, we're here to talk about leadership. Who on this mining site do you respect and admire would follow? Who on this mining site do you respect, you admire, and you would follow? You don't have to like them.
Yeah.
Right, but you do admire them and you do respect them and you would follow them. And I said, okay, what I want you to do is just get into groups and one of you scribe and take notes. You got an hour to do this, and then you're going to present. You're on this big piece of paper, you're going to come back and present.
Yeah.
Right? So they all went off. And so it was easy for me. I went and had a coffee and for an hour. I didn't even walk around or anything. I didn't. Australian facilitation. Do that, I'll be back in an hour. It wasn't quite like that. But what stunned me, and I didn't realise what I'd got. People have frameworks in their head. They're learning stuff, and they do it because they're doing it all day, every day. They don't realise the IP that they've got. They don't realise the asset they're creating or the framework that they're using. And what was shown to me that day took me another 4 years to realise what had actually happened in that room.
Yeah.
But they all came up with the same person. So they're all in. There were 6 groups, so 30 guys, maybe 7 groups, but they all came up with the same guy. And they said, who is it? And they said, oh, it's Frank. And I said, okay, tell me what it is about Frank. And this is what they said to me. And I've written a list here. Frank knows what's happening on this mining site.
Yeah.
He's aware, and they didn't use the awareness word, but they said he knows what's happening. And I said, okay, tell me a bit more about that. He says, if there's a situation going down, he knows about it. And he knows how he feels about it, and he'll let you know.
Yeah.
Right? And I'll come back to this in a moment. And then the second thing they said is he'll communicate his awareness. You may not like what he says to you, but you're left in no doubt what he thinks and feels about this.
Yeah.
And then they said he brokers really clear agreements. What I've learned is that agreements are the glue of delegation. So if the delegation isn't working, there's something wrong with the agreement. But he says he brokers really clear agreements. Who's doing what by when, blah, blah, blah. He said, and then he manages those agreements. And really they were saying he holds us accountable for what comes out of our gob.
Yeah.
But he manages the agreement. Did you say you were going to do this or not, Nikki? Yeah.
Interesting.
Get it? And this was the one that was really interesting. He said he wouldn't use the word acuity, or they wouldn't use the word acuity or agency, but they said he adjusts his game.
Yeah.
And I said, how do you mean? If there's a problem, what he does is he says, oh, what did I do to contribute to this? And then he'll say, and what was the impact on you guys? And I said, how's that different? Pardon me. He said, crap leaders go, oh, you guys did this. Finger pointing, you're the blame. And you'll see this with leaders. I see this with leaders that are struggling all the time. If something goes right, they take the credit for it.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong, they apportion blame very quickly.
Yeah.
He knows what's happening. He can communicate that awareness. He brokers clear agreements. He manages those agreements and he adjusts his game. Win, draw, lose, he adjusts. They review what happened. And I thought, okay, that's good. But the guys were going, yeah, we had that idea. We didn't have those words, but we had that.
Yeah.
And that sequence as well. I did some work with a guy in the military, and he was giving a talk about the leadership, and it was about the 3 C's of leadership: competence, character, and credibility, and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And he was describing a situation where they were being attacked on a daily basis. And he had a group of guys with him. They went down this street, and he did and I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'm holding my fist up, which means in military, stop.
Yeah.
And then he did a pull back sign, so they pulled back. And the question was, why did the guys follow you? Oh, because I had credibility, character, and charisma, or whatever the 3 C's were.
Yeah.
And I said, no, that's not what actually happened. I said, why didn't you go down that street? And he said, I don't know, it didn't look right. I said, what wasn't right about it? And he said, no. This is going to sound stupid. There were no chickens. I said, no chickens. He said, yeah, normally when we patrol down there's chickens. He said, I think someone had put the word out, you better not leave any animals out in the street today because we're going to be shooting people down here. He said, that's what got it. So his awareness cut in. So in the military and aviation, your awareness, you ignore your awareness at your own peril. On a mining site, you ignore your awareness at your own peril. And why do Nikki, how many people have you worked with? They'll be in a meeting. And I have a client of mine in San Diego who she specialises in glass ceiling women executives.
Yeah.
And they sit at the table, and it's a table of blokes, and they're talking rubbish, right?
Yeah.
And she wants to speak up, and she won't. And then after the meeting, she said, why didn't you say that in the meeting?
Yeah.
So in aviation, that's a disaster waiting to happen. On a mining site, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
On a mining site, when you become aware of something, you need to speak up. You can't sit on the information.
And you often talk about a leadership challenge comes before a business solution. I like that idea. Can you unpack it for me and tell me what does that mean? When I read and I've done research and looked at your books and things like that, this is a term that comes up.
Yeah, again, I wish I'd woken up with all this information in my head, but I've been doing this over 27 years. You get this bit by bit, right?
Yeah.
Bit by bit. But a leadership challenge, CEOs, let's talk about executives and CEOs. They're paid to be discerning. They're paid to be prudent.
Yeah.
Right. I created a thing in 2003 called the Business Leadership Profile.
Yes.
And I created it. It came out of when I employed people who you'd look at their CV and they go, wow, this guy's pretty cool. And the CV's great. And he interviewed really well. I put them into the position and they were complete duds.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm a smart guy. How did I miss this? And there were profiles out there, but in my experience, they've been written by academics who've never built or run a business.
Yeah.
So I created a hybrid one of my own called the Business Leadership Profile, which has been used worldwide for over 27 years.
Yeah.
And it tells me how someone's going to work under pressure, where they're going to go under pressure. So the thing is, firstly, is if you're running a business, it's naive to think you're not going to have problems. And the more successful you get, the more problems you get. But as a leader, you get better at solving those problems.
Yeah.
And what the profile tells me is how you're being and how you need to be as a leader. So those miners, when they're talking about Frank, were talking about how he was being And it was the first time that I actually had someone go, do you need to be a little bit more frank? You need to onboard a little bit more frank. Who do you need to be? So it's like people say, oh, you want to be the best version of yourself. It's really hard to build the best version of yourself from a crappy version that you're currently running if it's a crappy one. So we've got ways to move around that. But firstly, there is a challenge first, and business is a challenge. And I'll give you a great example of this. Again, and this is what I see with leadership coaching, is they'll go in and they'll do in and they'll trait qualities and traits of a good leader.
Yeah.
So it means that this is a highly qualified, very savvy, ambitious person who's got to onboard qualities and traits and then try and operationalize them in the mind and make them show up. How do you show up as credible? How do you show up with character? How on earth am I supposed to do that thing? Whereas if I say, let's start with, what's your awareness? Where are you right now? What's your awareness of what's happening right now? Situational awareness. Right?
And do you mean awareness in front of them or self-awareness?
Awareness has three components, and there's situational awareness where I'm aware of what's happening out there.
Yeah.
Self-awareness is you're aware of how you feel about what's happening out there.
Yeah.
And notice I'm not what you think about what you feel out there, what you feel about it. You can really think, but mainly what you feel. It doesn't feel. And where I learned that is in aviation and military. You haven't got the luxury to sit down and unpack it. You just got to go, it doesn't feel right. Okay. What's my response? And your response is really, you can do nothing. And if that's appropriate, do nothing. And quite often my awareness is telling me, do nothing, stay quiet, don't talk.
Yeah.
And a lot of coaches will, if their client goes quiet, they'll fill the void.
Yeah.
I'll just stop talking and I'll just wait until they let them look around, whatever, but I'll let them think. And then they come back. But the response awareness is I can do nothing. I can do something directly. So if Frank sees a problem on the mining site, he can go directly to the person and say, Nikki, why are you doing blah, blah, blah? Or I could do something indirect.
Yeah.
If I might talk to someone, hey, listen, can you have a word with Nikki about? And there's times when you've got to be indirect and times when you've got to be quite direct. But that's when I've worked with leaders, those are the three strategies they're using, particularly with challenges. But here's the point I want to make. When I go into a company that's had leadership development and they're on this agenda of the qualities and traits and these tricks and tips and things like that, which is they've got to onboard it. It's not natural. It's not intuitive. They've got to learn something.
Yeah.
And the feeling they get is, oh, I've got to learn something else. Then I'll be okay. When I've learned this, then I'll be a good leader. And I'm saying, no, I've worked with leaders who need to be the leader they need to be right here, right now. And your awareness is a tool that taps you in an immediate thing. What's going on? What's obvious to me? Manage the obvious type stuff. So where I see this really go sideways is when you have a leader who has a set way of leading, they've got their skill set, but the situation they've gone into is different. And there's basically 5 situations that I deal with when I coach people. And there's a startup growth.
Yeah.
There's a maintenance level, which is business is going really well. Let's just keep it going really well. Let's lead to keep it sustainable. There's a realignment, or what I call a renovation. In other words, we were really good. Something's happened. We need to get back to that.
Yeah.
We need to renovate and innovate to get back to where we were. And then there's the turnaround, which is we're in crisis mode. And then there's exit. And the opposite to an exit is a divestiture, I think it's called. You divest yourself of the asset.
Yeah.
Where you exit involuntarily. So I developed a thing called the leadership remit, which is what does this situation that you're going into require of you?
Yes.
And can you adjust to that? And where I see the problems is you've got someone who's built a business and it's maintained and it's slipped, and they're trying to use the leadership style that they had when it was maintaining.
Yes.
But they're in turnaround or crisis mode.
Yes.
You get it? So there can be obvious challenges like COVID.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got an absolute leadership field day globally with what's happening. If you don't know what's happening on the planet right now, you've been under a rock somewhere.
And do you find you talked about those different stages that, so for example, when a business starts, the skill set from a leadership perspective, I guess, let's think about the CEO, the skill set that they need in the very early days is very different to the skill set that they need when they are growing a team. So just that second phase, so that sort of that scale up phase. How do you help And the second part of that is, can most people make the transition from an operational, hands-on founder, co-founder, or early team leadership member through to what's needed in that second phase?
What I learned with my business was when it was just the 6 of us, I could be hands-on.
Yeah.
And I could supervise and manage. When we put the 7th person on, my team became an interruption to my day because I can't concentrate. And I'm going, why can't they just do their job?
Yeah.
When I got to 12, for me, leadership really starts to make its presence felt around about the 6th or 7th person that you put on. When you get to 12, you better be thinking about, if I've got more than 12 people on my team, 12 people, I really better be thinking. But when you get to 20, you've really got to be thinking about, when you're talking about up to 2 million and 20 staff, and I said stay under 20 staff or whatever it is. The hardest journey for most people is pushing through the 2 to 8 million mark in the UK statistically. It's so that we have more business failures, and look at it's only 4% of them. So 4 out of 100% make it through that threshold because it's so difficult. It's challenge ridden. And you're in growth, you're in maintenance, you're in all of those stages really come into their own.
Yeah.
But can you transition? Yeah, but you got to get uncomfortable. You got to be comfortable.
Yeah. And be open, as you say. And I think that self-reflection piece leads quite nicely into, you emphasize self-talk and mindset as keys to leadership success.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of a leader whose mindset shift dramatically impacted the business growth? And maybe if you've got an example, just to couple it with what you've just said, when a business is going beyond that 20.
Yeah, it's a good question because, again, this is where profiling helps because it'll tell you how you're being. And there are, if you know anything about transactional analysis, TA, for example, they talk about the 5 drivers, and it's well worth looking up. There's a great book you should have a look at called Screw Meditation by Sue Belton, who's based in the UK. And she talks about the 5 drivers, and she does a lot of TA coaching, for example, with companies. And so I won't pretend I know too much more than what I've spoken to her about. But my thing was, awareness is, what I know clinically is how we talk to ourselves. Generally, how we talk to ourselves as a rule is we're very hard on ourselves. We talk badly to ourselves. Yeah. When I did a small internship in a rehab clinic, you really discover what's going through your mind. The self-talk is usually, if you can imagine self-talk lives on a scale, imagine a scale where you've got neutral in the middle, then you've got positive and minus. Neutral self-talk would be, okay, after I speak to Nikki, I've got to swing by the post office, I've got to send something back to Amazon, I've got to pick up some bread and milk, I've got to drop into Aldi and pick up some coffee. It's benign, it's neutral, right? I might be thinking, I'm driving my car, I'm thinking positive self-talk. Hey, that went really well with Nikki. Gee, yeah, I really enjoyed that. That was fantastic. Negative, man, I talked too much. I was talking too fast and I swore a couple of times and man, that was really bad. See, humans are set up for positive self-talk. But we err on the side of negative self-talk, but it's still critiquing and appraising. What I'm interested in is when your self-talk goes double positive or double negative. So double positive looks like this. I was on talking on Nikki's point. Man, was I good or what? Man, I was so hot. Man, I'm not like mistakes, none. I'm just, brilliant, right? Double negative is, man, why did I say that? She's going to hate me. Man, I don't even know this stuff. Why was I, God, my stories are so old. I'm talking about a mining thing I did 20 years ago or 5 years ago, you're really beating yourself up. Right? But if you're in a leadership role, the awareness part is, self-awareness is, how am I talking to myself? And you've got to have that awareness, that mindfulness of, shoot, actually, I need to do something about this really. So self-talk for me, and I train my execs, and think about this, self-talk is how you talk to yourself. And it's called inner dialogue so you're dialoguing with yourself, okay? Chatter is what I use on mining sites and military and things. So the chatter, straight up, it's the conflict between, should I say something or not? Should I do something or not? It's binary. We talk about walk your talk. We talk about congruence is a thing I talk about leaders. If you want to they say take action, but you've got to come from a place of congruence. So if I say smoking's really bad,
Yeah.
I'm smoking a cigarette and talking about it. There's the talk, smoking's really bad, but there's the walk.
Yeah.
And the chatter lives in the gap.
Yeah.
The self-talk lives in that gap. And when we talk about people who we admire and trust, the gap between the walk and the talk is very small. It's
Oh,
never
that's
going
so
to be
interesting.
perfect. But the people we don't think so well and don't admire or respect as much, the walk and the talk, there's a massive gap between what they say and what they do.
Yeah, so they often seem to be, I suppose people might describe that as someone who comes across as dishonest.
Oh, totally. And no
Yeah.
self-honesty. Right?
Sorry, say that again, Andrew.
And no self-honesty.
Yes.
Yeah. So the double positive is usually narcissistic.
Yes.
And then the self-aggrandizing. And then the double negative is usually self-denigrating.
Yeah.
And we see that with anxieties and depressions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see sociopaths and that up at the other end where I'm not wrong. What, me wrong? What are you talking about? Yeah, so that congruence, that self-talk, the chatter is, and I'll give you the example now so that you can see it. So I had this client, I'll call him Bill.
Yeah.
Okay, for want of a better name. Okay. And when I walk in, I say, yeah, Bill, how's it all going? Yep. Have you got any chatter about anything? Have you got what's been happening that we want to talk about? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I was talking to my CFO and she was going through the management accounts and we're looking at aged receivables and we got 83,000 in aged receivables. So think of it like this. If I said take 83,000 pounds out of your bank, stick it in a plastic bag and throw that behind you and don't look at it for 126 days.
Yeah.
You'd say, no, you're nuts. Crazy. I said, okay. So what's your chatter? Oh, should I ring them up or not? The people owe me money. Should I ring them up or not? I said, walk me through that. And he said, they're good customers. I said, I think you'll find the definition of a good customer is someone who pays their bill on time. Oh, yeah, but I've had them a long time. I think you'll find the definition of I think you've had them a long time because you give them 126 days to pay their bill.
Nothing,
right?
yeah.
And for context here, let's say you wrote the invoice on January 1st, you still haven't been paid by April 30, right? Yeah. And how do you fund that? You fund that through your overdraft. So they're getting an interest-free loan and they're using your money to underwrite their business.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So at that point, I said, how are you being around this issue? And he said, based on what you've told me, if you were observing someone else doing this, how would you say they're being around this issue? He said, oh, I'm being a bit of a lame ass on this one. I said, yeah, it's 50 lashes with wet spaghetti. Yeah. He said, yeah, I'm holding back, blah, blah. Okay. What do you think you should do about it? All right. Close the gap. Yeah. What do you need to say or do? There's the chatter. See, chatter's not dialogue. Chatter's a decision, a conflict between what do I need to say or do or not say or do.
Yeah.
And you get chatter because you're saying and doing something that you shouldn't be saying or doing.
That's so interesting. And I've often found a good way to get people to reflect is to say, if you were to advise somebody in the same situation, what would you be saying to them? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You externalize their pressure.
Yeah.
Right? So this is what I know clinically, right? Again, we're using a spectrum here, right? Down here is pain.
Yeah.
And up here is pleasure. Which one do humans normally go for? Pleasure. We're pleasure hedonistic. We're pleasure focused, right? We avoid pain to go for pleasure. But what if you've got pain 1 here and pain 2? Which pain do you go to?
Yeah.
The lesser of the two pains, right? So I said, what's your solution? Oh, I'm going to go and see my bank manager and get an overdraft extension. Sweet, I'll be your customer. Because going to the bank manager who's going to say yes is the lesser of the two pain. Yeah. And I said, okay, so when you get that, I said, I'm going to give you a third pain. I said, I'll tell you what you want to do. Right, it's 83 grand. Yeah, I said, write me a cash check for 8,300. And give me the list of who owes you money, and I'll have them in within 10 working days. He goes, oh, I could do that. Oh, how would you do it?
Yeah,
interesting. He said, I'd get a list of everybody who owes me money and the guys who did the deals and get them to chase it. I said, Now you're thinking like a leader.
Yeah.
So he recovered 78,000 of that in 2 working days.
Wow.
So who was he being this is a guy, I want you to understand, this is a well-educated, savvy, running a great business.
Yeah.
So he's not an idiot, but how he's being around certain situations. And you could say, Sue would say, from a transactional analysis perspective, you're probably drawing back into the archive of when you're a kid, how you handle money issues when you're a kid. And one of the drivers is please others.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to please others. I said, what'd you learn out of this? This is the learning part, the reflective piece. What'd you learn out of this? He said, yeah. I said, I do this all the time. I said, where else do you do it? He said, I do it with my staff. I said, oh, okay. So the thing I don't want, Bill, 3 months from now, he comes and says, people owe me £538,000 in the age receivables. I said, mate, we need to take you to the doctors because I think you've got amnesia. You forgot how to deal with this. There's the accountability thing.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Did you agree to this or not?
Yeah.
He said, yeah. I said, so walk your freaking talk.
Yeah.
I said, clearly I'm not charging you enough.
It's interesting. I think some leaders find tough conversations difficult.
We know why. Yeah. If they've got to be strong, then I've got to solve every problem myself.
Yeah.
But the message you send to the troops is don't think.
That's interesting.
And the transition you're talking about is let's get you out of the operational hands-on,
yes,
my overalls on, up to strategic, where it's more about delegation, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be. You literally can't be across every aspect of the business. As soon as you get over 6, you literally can't do it. So you've got to start investing in your leadership. So if you're someone who has 6 to 20 people, I would say it's stamped urgent. But the happy news is that Bill documented his learnings with his team, and they initiated a new policy. They changed all the policy on their invoicing with their clients. They rang each one and they talked them through it, and they don't have age receivable issues anymore.
Yeah.
So they formalised and made it explicit what their policy was, and they didn't leave it up to chance, and there was no exception. So they instigated a meeting where once a week they'd get round, and the first thing is, who owes us money? What have you done about it? Because the cash flow, I wrote a book on it called How Money Flows Through Your Business.
Yeah.
Where you understand the balance sheet, the income statement and cash flow statement. And I said, from putting my non-executive director hat on, Bill, if you keep going with this, your business is at risk because you're starving it of cash.
Yeah.
And your only answer is to keep borrowing. Yeah.
So you work a lot with obviously different stage businesses in terms of their growth, but a lot around family run businesses. And I know from experience, hence the grey hair, having worked with lots of family businesses, that some of the challenges are different.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
So what about a story that you could tell me about? What are some of the big emotional and practical challenges that either a family business bringing a leader into the business from outside the family?
Again, just so people understand, when you look at there's family businesses and non-family businesses. Let's start with that. And a family business has the 3 areas of the business, the family, and ownership issues. And what they're supposed to do, if you're in a management thing, you're looking at the ownership, the management, and the governance of that business.
Yep.
That's what you're doing. Okay. And usually family businesses, particularly if they're established, they're fiscal driven, they're established, we're multi-generational.
Yeah. Usually
they've got a platform of values and traditions and principles that they're building on. And so if you imagine there's a thing called the socio-emotional wealth model.
Yeah.
So have a look at the 3-circle model, which is well worth looking at, because you can see 3-circle model describes us. We've got someone who works in the business but's not an owner. We've got people who have ownership of business but they don't work in it and they're family. Yeah. People who work in the business, they're not family, they're not owners. And where you get those overlapping, intersecting thing, that's where your challenges will show up. And it's highly predictable, the issues that you're going to have when you understand that model. But to give that colour, if you look at the social emotional wealth model, what happens there is, think of it like a seesaw. If we had to balance things out, all things being equal, you'll have emotions at this end and you'll have economics at the other end. I love these little things here.
Yeah.
And if we have to make a decision, it'll always lean in favour of family values,
Yes.
emotional context, unless there's a crisis, in which case we're going to go for the economics.
Yeah.
If the business isn't going to survive, we put our economics hat on.
Yeah.
So an example of that would be, I'll call him Peter's dad. Jeff started a fashion business, and it focused on country menswear. So it's like farming boots and the tweed jackets and all that sort of stuff, right? And Pete's dad had trained in woolen mills, and he started this fashion brand. And then there were 4 brothers, and all 3 of them said, don't want to work in this business. Nobody wants to work in the business. Pete was doing their summer jobs, and then Jeff had a stroke.
Yeah.
And the only person who, the other 3 brothers, no, we don't want to be involved. We need to professionalise, bring someone in. Pete said, I can't do that just yet. So he took the business over.
Yeah.
And he brought new ideas into it, and he did some professionalisation on the skills that he lacked. But he maintained the ownership 100% with the family.
Yeah.
The management was shared with the professionalised role. And then it did incredibly well. And all 4 brothers were shareholders, but not directors. Peter was the only director. See how complex this is getting already?
Yeah.
And guess where that ended when it did really well? In court. Right? Because they say, why weren't we made directors? We want our share of the family business. And Pete said, no, you didn't build it up. I built the business up. I'm the one who's made all these decisions. Yeah, but we're family.
Yeah.
And we know where that goes, particularly get it to a 3rd generation. So Peter's son is coming into the business as well. So the other 3 brothers are quite antsy. Now, they don't talk to each other.
Yeah. What about when you've seen it successfully happen where, for example, the CEO has transitioned out and they're bringing somebody in from outside the family?
It can happen, but usually there's a lot of lead up to that where they've actually been talking about that for some time. I would say, if anything, I don't care whether you're family or non-family business, if you've been around for a long time, governance is probably your number one thing. You need to document what's been happening, have very clear policies and procedures, even if they're just scratch ones, right?
Yeah.
But start thinking about them. And I do a poor man's policy kit where just sit down, lunch and learn with your team. What do we think about hiring? Collect that, get it transcribed, turn that into a document, and then come back a month later and look at it and say, what did we learn from that? So it's a very gentle approach, but get your governance documented. Document your roles.
Yeah. It happens. It's so common, particularly if people want investment.
Yep.
If you're going to go through a due diligence round, documentation, process, it is so important.
Yeah. So again, if we were bringing someone on, they've had conversations about that. They've done a reality check where I'm talking with a company that's 6 generations, where succession is on the map because there was a family tragedy. The son that was going to take it on is no longer there. So all of that was lost. And yet Peter said, we used to say, Dad, we've got to sit down and talk about supply chain because the world had moved on. Geopolitically right now, there's a lot of supplier shake-ups going on.
Yeah.
You don't understand that. So, in my experience, I call them conversations, family conversations or business conversations, cultural conversations, rather than documentation, which has it's very relaxed over a beer or coffee, and we get it recorded. And then I got people, or you can use your own people, who will type that up, or they'll transcribe it and edit it and look for the patterns.
Yeah, exactly. And it's often a really positive process because people's roles have evolved over 20 years and the sort of the breadth of which they're responsible for needs to evolve. And by capturing it, you can also go back full circle to what we were talking at the beginning. It's an opportunity for that self-reflection.
It's smart money too, not to jettison the owner-founders, but to bring them into that process of handover and succession. And it's not just, succession isn't just handing a role to somebody, it's handing a culture and a mindset.
Yes.
I'll give you a great story of someone I was chatting to last week, where this is a family removal company, the furniture removal company. And this was built by the grandfather, started off. And the grandson, they had a family lunch day and the kids on the computer, and Granddad goes, kids on the bloody computer, always got their head in the computer. And he said, what are you looking at? So the Granddad said, what are you looking at? He said, AI. And he goes, what's that? And he said, and he talked him through a bit. He said, all right. The typical thing, come on, sunshine, AI can do it. Oh, come on, then, come on. Joey.
Yeah.
Right. And so he goes, what's one of the problems you got, Grandad? And he says, oh, loading a van. Come on, let's see, smart ass. Show us what I can do. So the kid goes, show me how big's the van? He goes, give him the dimensions. He says,
Yeah.
okay, how far's it got to go, Grandad? So he types in, ding.
Yeah.
I want a policy for loading a van that has to travel more than 1,000 miles and is carrying 22 tonne. A loading, pardon me, hay fever. A loading policy, right? And he printed it out. And the granddad went, shoot, this is really impressive. It's everything I know and some stuff that I've been thinking about and some next steps. So he said, do you want to come and work with me? He said, you can be our AI officer for the loading thing. And over the last, when's AI? No, in the last 6 months, like just on loading a truck, he said, we're online to saving like 43,000 this quarter on how we load and unload trucks.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
But that's unique because you got someone who's open to, we've got to innovate.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I'm working with someone, we say, we've got this problem. I say, what's the objective? Let's start with what is it you're trying to achieve here? So an example of that would be, I was a chairman of a children's charity and I said, what's the objective? What's our objective? And our charity specialised in play therapy. So if you think Grenfell Towers, those kids can't do talking therapy. They were too small, too young. But they can do play therapy and resolve some of their issues, right? So play therapy is really unique for someone who suffered trauma. The charity was set up to safeguard children 4 to 12, vulnerable children 4 to 12. So I'm talking with the team, what's our objective? And our objective was to be recognised as the go-to charity for play therapy in the UK.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, what's 5 key results that we need to achieve that will achieve that objective? You can have your own objectives and key results, but for the business, what are the 5 key results? So we need a database of all the schools in the UK. We need to get our website, our CRM and website working, and we need product that we can put on our website. We can go back to the schools and say, here's a course that you can buy for free or you can at low cost. So we only had 3 things that we were trying to achieve. So we had to, firstly, there's the objective. We had to innovate something.
Yeah.
And so I'll say to companies, we're innovating. What's the purpose of innovation? So if you're leading an innovation, what's the purpose of that innovation?
Yeah.
And in my book, it's to create efficiency, right? So with Bill, who had his business, if it takes me 9 hours to do it, I can now do it in 90 minutes. I've created, and I do it really well, I've created efficiency. I've innovated to create that efficiency. And in a law firm, for example, where it's cloud-based and like accounting, it's cloud-based, you can create those efficiencies, crazy efficiencies if you innovate really well, right? And then I say, what's the purpose of efficiency? They said, I don't know. I said, the purpose of an efficiency is to create capacity, to free up capacity. So you've done a 9-hour thing, you're doing it now in 90, you've now got 8 hours to sell, or you can do 8 hours for training. So I would say one of the things that leaders need is think time. I'm too busy to think.
Yeah.
I'm in the weeds. I've got my overalls on. As a leader, particularly the difference between an operational leader and a strategic leader is a strategic leader takes time out to reflect and focus on the direction and get clear where we're headed with this, right? So we create this capacity. Great. What do you do with that capacity? That drives your revenues. And if you do that, make sure they're profitable. And then with that, you've got good cash flow. Make sure you're driving up the valuation of the business. Invest, and you might exit if you want, or do an M&A, whatever it is. But if someone says we want more revenues, I'll work backwards and say, have you got the capacity for more revenues? And are you efficient? And what do you need to innovate? And what was your objective anyway?
And how, just picking up on a point that you made in there, that transition from an operational to a strategic, you must have spoken to many CEOs, founders, making that transition.
Yeah.
How do you unpack that so that they can really start to make that move?
Yeah. Unpack is the good word. The short answer is just say, stop doing that. Stop it. Stop rolling your sleeves up. Stop micromanaging. But they do need to unpack it. And particularly, again, I'll go back to my model, which is tell me what's happening. Yeah. What's happened? Give me a situation, and then we unpack the situation. Because I can give you the framework This is what I see a lot of advice on LinkedIn. It gives you the framework, and the frameworks are all robust and they work for the person sharing them, but there's no context.
Yeah.
So you do need that context. So if we unpack something with a leader and they unpack it, and I say, okay, what was the situation? Okay, how did you feel about that? No, not good. What did you want to do about it? Yeah. What did you need to assert? What were the agreements you needed to broker?
Yeah.
With yourself and with your team. So we'll unpack it slowly, and it can be the most benign thing, the absolute benign thing. I'll give you an example of this. I'm going up in an elevator up to a meeting, and there's two people, and the guy next to me, he's got his subordinate with him, and he turns to me, he says, "What, no tie today?" And the guy goes, "Oh," like this. "No, this is how we wear it now, Grandpa. We don't wear a tie anymore." It's so benign, but later he was so furious about that, right? Because they're going up to a very important meeting. They're trying to put their best foot forward. None of that was made explicit.
Yeah.
And the kid, to his credit, turned to him and said, "We've never had a discussion about how to dress for important meetings."
Yeah.
But the insight that he got, so you're coaching for insight as well. The insight that he got was, where else have we not made stuff explicit? Where else have we not talked about how we do things, processes, things that we just assume people, common sense, you should have this.
And I think that becomes more important, that point that you've just made there about making things explicit. In the early days of a business, the startup phase, it's all very scrappy, it's all hands to the pump and people just roll their sleeves up and make things happen. And then it becomes more important for things to be explicit. And we say the word process, it can be a light touch process. Yes. But the difficulty is, unless it's explicit, the expectations on new people who come in, you're not setting them up to succeed, you're setting them up to fail.
Yeah. And I think, again, an example of this is I'm a strategic advisor to one of the major musical foundation on the planet.
Yeah.
And I had to go, and I'm talking, it's Classical Music Foundation, and I'm not a classical music aficionado by any stretch. Punk. I played in a punk band, for goodness sake. I've got two world-renowned conductors on the board of major orchestras, and I've got one of the best music biographers and researchers on the board. And I'm thinking, oh man, it's frightening to go and front a board like that. You're really dealing with incredible talent and firepower, right? But I thought, I'm going to give them a conversational discussion paper. So I sat down with my phone and I just talked to my phone for 20 minutes about my thoughts and feelings. But they were trying to craft their vision and mission statement, right?
Yeah.
And their principles. So I shared a little bit about how I did that with the children's charity, for example, and I've done it with other companies, and the struggles that I had and the self-doubt I had around were we on the right track, and the fact that I wasn't qualified, and etc. But they all came back and they said to a person, we absolutely love that because we got to know who you were.
Yes.
We got to know a little bit about your background, what didn't work for you and the things you struggle with. And it was the same stuff we're struggling with.
Yeah,
right. And that's what I love about if you're trying to make values and principles explicit. Can I talk to you about principles for a sec?
Yes, please.
My brother he's a private chef to heavy hitters, right?
Yeah.
Really big identities. And he was asked for a proposal about, we know that your core values underpin everything and they help people buy. The clearer you are on your core values, the clearer it is for people to make a buying decision for a step, particularly if it's a big investment. And my brother hates paperwork. He's a chef, right? He just loves being in the kitchen. So he's cooking. I've got my voice recorder talking, and I said, look, anyone can try this. You can try this at home. If I said, this is what I know to be true. Every organisation I've ever worked in is underpinned by principles that you are non-negotiable, whether you're aware of them or not.
Yes.
So I said, Pip, let's make these explicit. And just tell me all the principles that govern this business. So he came up with 28. I said, okay, give me the top 7. I just want 7. I don't want 28. I want 7. Yeah. That's what I did with the music board when we did this principles mission. Before we get to mission and vision, we said, what are the principles?
Yeah.
So we got down to 7. And the 7 with this, number 1, it's everything we cook is fresh. He said, if you're talking health and why you get sick and things, because you're eating foods that aren't in season.
Yeah.
Everything, if it's animals, everything we do is ethically sourced.
Yeah.
Because my clients do not ever want to say, oh, you got your food from this farm where they mistreat animals. It's sympathetically farmed. So it's got to be culled. It's done sympathetically.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's impeccable in the execution.
Yeah.
And it's discreet.
Yeah.
And he backfilled all of those 7 principles. That's what we put in the proposal. And they said the word of mouth on that, because it was really clear, it covers everything from food preparation to their philosophy.
Yeah.
And the backstory to all of those 7 points goes back 55 years. He's been cooking 55 years. So there's a real pedigree of thinking behind 7 principles, let alone 28. Right? Yeah. 28 was just nuances.
And I think that's the glue. You call them principles, whether you call them principles, values, but whatever terminology you use, it's the glue that holds the business together.
I think we should do a workshop called The Glue.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I do. And I've been hiring for a long time. And the clearer you can be on those, in your words, those principles, you'd just be so much more successful.
And they're non-negotiable. In other words, absolutely never, ever will we cook stuff that's not fresh or in season. Yeah. That's non-negotiable. If that's not you, I can't be your chef.
Yeah.
I think the problem is, and I see this, is that when I see consultants go in and try and do this work with families, particularly family business, but any business, like a law firm I was talking to recently, they go in there they speak corporatese, and people they're not tapping anything emotional or deep. And they'll get there. We have loyalty and we have integrity, and I'll talk about those things, but it's not. There's no connection. They're throwaways. How do you operationalise loyalty?
Yeah, right? And I think it is. It's like you just said, it is digging deep. So what does that word mean to you? Yeah. It's really bringing it to life, isn't it, day to day in this business?
And to give that time so they can talk it through. And when I was talking to Pip, it's not like he said, I've got 7 principles, here they are. We had to talk and tease that out.
Yeah.
Because he kept talking about fresh food. I said, why is fresh food important to you? And he didn't even, this is what I'm saying, he was so close to his own process, he didn't realise there's a 7-point framework that he's very close to on the day-to-day. He's been doing it so long, he doesn't even see that this is how these are the principles or the glue that underpins the success of a very long established business.
Yeah. You know? That leads beautifully into my next question. Yeah. So you've developed your own frameworks, you've written books. Are there any other mental models that you often go back to when you are, in particular, let's pick a situation, when you've got a leader who's making that transition from operational to strategic?
Usually when I start coaching, they've usually got, whether they say it or not, there's a problem that they're dealing with. And it's usually people, performance, processes, but it's usually it starts with a P, usually, whatever it is. Yeah. But they'll come in with a problem. What I saw was that when we have a problem, we usually want to jump to a solution.
Yeah.
Because if I've got to choose between pleasure and pain, I want to move away from the pain as fast as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me the other day that, and if I got this wrong, I got it wrong, but 46% of FTSE 500 leadership appointments fail. But when they dug into it, it's the way they solve problems, the problems that they have and how do they solve them. And what are your options? Yeah. Explore options. What solution are you going to run with? But then importantly, how will you know it's working? So when you're dealing with complexity with leaders, to get them to transition out of, let's say, a hands-on. So I've got a guy who, I'll give you a real case. We're changing our data center from point A to point B. We're moving it from this building to this building because our capacity's grown. We need to triple the size of our data center. Okay. So we have to shut this down on Friday at 6:00 and it has to reopen on Monday at 9. So at 9:00, because some of our players, if they're not back online at 9 a.m., it's serious reputation damage and truckload of money. Every second they're not online, that's a lot of money, right? This guy says, I think I'll delegate it. And I'll do the strategic thing and I'll just tell him. And then he rings me and he says, I've got lots of chatter. I said, what do you got chatter? The guy is supposed to be doing it. It's not there.
Yeah.
What do you think you should do? I know what I'd do. I'd roll my sleeves up.
Yeah.
I would go down there and I'd sort it out. The chips are too big. So I'm not saying don't go hands-on if you don't have to. I've run a business where I've said, my guy Ken came in, production manager, oh, how do we solve this? It's time to roll our sleeves up,
Yeah.
problem solver. And then at the end of it, he goes, whew, problem averted. And I said, Ken, come in here, let's have a chat. Why was it necessary for me to roll my sleeves up?
Yeah.
So the same with my guy. He went down there, cancelled holiday trips, everything. They did the transition. It went well. The guy turned up at 4:30 on the Saturday.
Yeah.
He delegated it and he thought he could go hands off.
Yeah.
And I said, mate, you don't work here anymore. Simple.
Yeah.
That's a simple one. That's a dereliction of duty, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not, I'll go hands off. It's if you have to go hands on, but you better have a very good reason and you better then follow up. You need to go out of the operational back up to the strategic.
Yeah.
How would a leader deal with that? Why was it necessary for me to come back down into the weeds?
Yeah.
Let's explore that, because that's showing serious deficiencies in what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And again, that takes time to unpack that.
Yeah.
They get the mind shift. They shut the chatter down. They shut down the self-talk because the stakes are a lot bigger.
What is the biggest? This question has just come into my mind. So of all the people that you've coached, what's the one that you're most proud of, and what was the impact?
The obvious one would be Jane, who was in an aged care unit. And to give you the visual on this, you got nurses coming late for evening shift.
Yeah.
And it's 2:00 in the morning, and two patients have a heart attack at the same time, and you're two nurses down, and you've got a nurse that's got a dilemma. Which one do they go to? There's only one nurse, but two people having a heart attack, and two people are late for their shift. Which one do they go to?
Yeah.
And Jane sorted that out. And I'm really proud of that, because businesses, the goal of business is to make money, straight up. Most people say, why ask students all over the world, what's the goal of business? Oh, it's to make money. The purpose of business, though, is to deliver extraordinary value to others. So make money. I'm not allergic to money.
Yeah.
But let's deliver extraordinary value.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that line, deliver extraordinary value to others.
Yeah.
So we're going to close on a quick fire round.
Yeah.
So the one quality every great leader needs right now.
Kindness.
Most common leadership blind spot.
I can't think of the word, but it's too hands-on. They've got to be hands-on. When you're hands-on, you're the handbrake, you're the meddler, you're the handbrake on the move. What's one word for that?
No, that for me is self-explanatory.
Yeah.
The most effective leadership habit you've seen?
Prioritise reflection.
Nice. One question every leader should ask themselves regularly.
How am I contributing to this?
Like it. And then final, put my teeth in, final reflections. If you could distill your years of coaching experience into one piece of advice for founders who are either stuck, overwhelmed, or unsure about the next steps, what would it be?
Yeah, so you remember right at the top of this conversation, I told you I started a business that I was working 12 to 14-hour days. Yeah. And I used to say, I learned three things. Number one, most people I talk to have got a great idea for a business, but not a great business for the idea.
Yeah.
And that's where they need a coaching help on that one. The second thing is most people I talk to say, I'm running my business, but in actual fact, the business is running them. Yeah. So the insight that I got was, and you might want to think this one through if you're listening to this, is you can configure your game at any time.
Yeah.
You can reconfigure your game at any time. It might take you 15 years to reconfigure it. It might take you 15 minutes to reconfigure it, but you can reconfigure any game as soon as you want. Sadly, a lot of people need help doing that. And that's the value of a coach, that a coach gives you that ability to reflect and get feedback. But I had to reconfigure my game, and particularly because we talked about values, I was violating family values. I was violating my family values. And sometimes you don't know what you're violating.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right to come back full circle. It
doesn't feel right, exactly. You know it's wrong, and it doesn't feel, there's no joy in the game, there's no love in the game, there's no kindness to yourself and others in the game. But if anything, reflect on this. You can reconfigure your game anytime you want.
Yeah.
Trust me, I've done it with hundreds and hundreds of clients over a long period of time where they think that's not possible, and then they go, damn, it was.
Fantastic. Love it. Look, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've got a ton of learning from it. I'm absolutely confident that those that have listened or watch will do. In the description below, I'll make sure that we share any links to your books and any of your work with the audience. So a big thank you from me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm on Kindle, and I'm not on LinkedIn, and I'm on andrewpriestley.com. So.
Perfect. I will make sure all of that is in the description so that people can reach out to you.
Can I say thank you so much? I love the questions for a start off because it makes me dig deep. And I would say on this, at the moment, I'm going through a stage. You get to a stage in life where you think about legacy, you think about what can I pass on, what have I learnt?
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to do stuff like this because I'm really thinking what's important to me, what's really meaningful, important to me that I want to pass on to people.
Yes.
I wish I had someone when I started that business who could have pulled me up and held me accountable. I had to learn the hard way. I had to make every mistake possible and some. But I know that I've worked with a lot of people where they say, oh, I'll put it off. And then 18 months later, I said, I wish I'd started working with you 18 months ago.
Yeah.
So if you've got a sense that you need to work with a coach or whoever it is, it doesn't have to be me, but anyone in the area that you need, do it sooner.
Start now.
Do it sooner, yeah. It's well worth the investment. And to give you the litmus test for this, think about if I asked you, Nikki, I want to buy an hour of your time. You don't have to say this, but most execs I work with, I said, I want to buy an hour of your time. How much are you going to charge me? And they'll throw out a number. And I'll say, okay, now multiply that by 8. That's your day rate. Multiply that by 200 working days.
Yeah.
That's how I think I'm a lot cheaper than what you're wasting at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's that, isn't it? It's that mindset. And I think in this conversation there have been some cracking takeaways that people will get the opportunity to implement, listen to, reflect on, and hopefully they will lean into your the information that I put into the description as well. And
listen to this a couple of times and give Nikki the feedback, right? Because there's nothing frivolous or superfluous in this conversation today.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Love it. Thanks, Andrew. Take care. Bye.
God bless.
That's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. If you got value from today's conversation, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. It helps us bring even more real stories your way. Got a scale-up challenge, a story to share, or want to recommend someone that I should interview? Take a look at the link to our website in the description below and pop us a message. Until the next time, keep scaling, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone on your scale-up journey.